Welcome to my channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The first time I heard it, I was eating a cheesesteak at Jim's on South Street in Philadelphia. The sound came from nowhere and everywhere at once. A deep, resonant toll that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I dropped my sandwich, mayo and onions spilling across the checkered floor, and looked around wildly. Nobody else had heard it. The tourists kept chatting, the locals kept scrolling their phones, and the guy behind the counter kept slicing ribeye like nothing had happened. That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks before I learned the truth about America's most famous broken bell. But wait, before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand something. Something that might save your life one day. They say the Liberty Bell hasn't rung since 1846, when it cracked beyond repair. They say it sits silent in its glass pavilion on Market Street, visited by 2 million people every year who come to see a piece of American history frozen in time. They're wrong. The bell rings. Oh God, it rings all the time. You just have to be dying to hear it. And now, the story begins. My name is Marcus Chen, and was a history teacher at Benjamin Franklin High School in North Philadelphia. 34 years old, married to Sarah, father to 8-year-old Emma. Normal guy, normal life, normal problems. Until that October afternoon when everything changed. I'd taken my AP history class on a field trip to Independence Hall. Same trip I'd done 12 times before. We'd walked through the assembly room where the Declaration of Independence was signed, stood where Washington accepted command of the Continental Army, touched the same banister that Jefferson once gripped. The kids were actually engaged for once, asking questions, taking pictures that weren't just selfies. We saved the Liberty Bell for last. Always do. It's the money shot, the thing they all want to see. That famous crack running up its bronze surface like a frozen lightning bolt. "Mr. Chen?" Kaylee Morrison asked, her phone already out for the inevitable Instagram post. "Why did it really crack?" I launched into my practiced speech. Well, there are several theories. Some say it cracked the first time it was rung in 1752. Others claim it happened during Chief Justice John Marshall's funeral in 1835. That's when I heard it. Dong! The sound hit me like a physical force. My knees buckled. My vision went white at the edges. The pavilion tilted sideways and I had to grab the barrier rope to keep from falling. The bell, the Liberty Bell. It was ringing. Not just ringing, screaming. A sound that was somehow both ancient and immediate, both mournful and triumphant. "Mr. Chen?" Kaylee's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You okay?" I blinked hard. The bell sat silent in its housing, tourists milling around it taking photos. My students were staring at me with that particular mix of concern and secondhand embarrassment that teenagers perfect. I'm fine. Just felt dizzy for a second. Low blood sugar probably, but I wasn't fine. Because as we left the pavilion, as we walked past the security guards and through the metal detectors, I could still hear it. Faint now, like an echo of an echo, but persistent. The Liberty Bell was still ringing, and only I could hear it. That night, I did what any reasonable person would do. I Googled it. Liberty Bell ringing hallucination gave me nothing useful. Hearing bells that aren't there led me to articles about tinnitus and schizophrenia, neither of which felt right. It wasn't until I stumbled onto a forum post from 2011, buried on page 17 of my search results, that I found the first clue. The post was titled, "Has Anyone Else Heard It?" by username Patriot Ghost 1776. It read, "I know this sounds crazy, but I swear I heard the Liberty Bell ring last Tuesday. I was visiting Philly for a conference, walked past Independence Hall around sunset and heard it clear as day. Big, deep toll that made my bones hurt. Security guard looked at me like I was nuts when I asked about it. Starting to think maybe I am. Has anyone else experienced this? 3 replies. First 2 were trolls. The third made my blood run cold. You're not crazy, but you might want to get your affairs in order. Check the obituaries for Philadelphia, October 2011. Count back 49 days from today. That's your number. Patriot Ghost, 1776, never posted again. I checked. A Marcus Patterson, 42, died of a sudden heart attack 49 days after that forum post. He'd been visiting Philadelphia for an insurance conference. I sat back in my desk chair, Sarah sleeping peacefully in our bed just 10 feet away, Emma dreaming whatever beautiful dreams 8-year-olds dream. And I did the math. If the pattern held, if this wasn't just coincidence and madness, I had 46 more days. I should have told Sarah. Should have gone to a doctor. Should have done a lot of things. Instead, I became obsessed. I spent every free moment researching. The Liberty Bell, originally called the State House Bell, was cast in London in 1752. It cracked the first time it was rung. Recast by Philadelphia founders John Pass and John Stowe, it rang for years before developing its famous crack. The last time it officially rang was February 23, 1846, for George Washington's birthday. But the unofficial history, that was different. I found fragments, whispers. A letter in the Pennsylvania Historical Society archives that mentioned the Devil's Toll heard by dying soldiers at Valley Forge. A journal entry from a nurse at Pennsylvania Hospital in 1918 describing Spanish flu patients claiming to hear bells in their final days. An interview with a Twin Towers survivor who swore he heard the Liberty Bell ringing as he ran from the collapsing South Tower, even though he was in New York. The pattern was always the same. The dying heard it, and they had 49 days. On day 42, I met Samuel. I was back at Independence Hall, drawn there like a moth to flame. I'd been coming every day after school, standing in front of the bell, waiting, listening. The security guards had started to recognize me, exchanging those little glances that said they were keeping an eye on the weird guy. You hear it too. The voice came from behind me. I turned to find an elderly black man in a Vietnam veteran cap, his eyes the clouded blue of cataracts but somehow still sharp, still seeing. I don't know what you're talking about, I lied. He smiled, a sad, knowing expression. Son, I've been hearing that bell for 3 weeks now. Gets louder every day. You're what, about a week in? My silence was answer enough. Come on, he said, turning toward the exit. Let me buy you a coffee. We need to talk. His name was Samuel Williams, Master Sergeant, retired. 78 years old. Terminal pancreatic cancer, though you wouldn't know it to look at him. We sat in a small cafe on Walnut Street, and he told me things that rewrote everything I thought I knew about American history. The bell's always rung, he said, stirring sugar into his black coffee with a steady hand, since the day it was cast. The crack didn't silence it. It just changed who could hear it. You know what the inscription says? Proclaim liberty throughout all the land, unto all the inhabitants thereof, I recited. Leviticus 25:10. That's right. But liberty means different things to different people. To the dying, liberty means freedom from pain, from suffering, from the mortal coil itself. He took a sip of coffee. The bell calls us home. That's, I wanted to say crazy, but couldn't. Not when I could hear it even now, a faint tolling beneath the cafe's jazz music and espresso machine hiss. There are more of us than you think, Samuel continued. We find each other, drawn by the sound. Some fight it, some embrace it, but we all hear it, and we all have 49 days. Why 49? 7 times 7, sacred number, completion. The bell rings 7 times a day for 7 weeks, calling us to our final independence. He pulled out a small notebook, worn and filled with names and dates. I've been keeping track. Every name, everyone I've met who heard it. Would you like to add yours? I watched him write Marcus Chen in careful script, along with the date. October 15th, 2024. What happens on day 49? I asked. Samuel's cataract-clouded eyes met mine. Freedom, he said simply, one way or another. By day 30, I couldn't hide it anymore. The bells were getting louder, more frequent. 7 times a day, just like Samuel said. Dawn, mid-morning, noon, mid-afternoon, sunset, dusk, and midnight. Each toll lasted longer, resonated deeper. Sometimes I'd lose whole minutes, standing frozen as the sound washed over me, through me. Sarah thought I was having a breakdown. Emma kept asking why Daddy was so sad. I wanted to tell them, but how could I? Hey honey, I'm dying in 19 days because a magic bell told me so wasn't exactly dinner table conversation. I'd stopped going to work on day 25, told them I had the flu, then pneumonia, then just stopped answering their calls. What was the point? I had research to do, people to find, answers to uncover. Samuel introduced me to the others. We met in the basement of an old church in Society Hill, 6 blocks from Independence Hall. Close enough to feel the pull, far enough to think clearly. There were 9 of us at that first meeting. Margaret, a 60-year-old nurse from Temple University Hospital. Day 38. Brain tumor. Jackson, a 22-year-old college student from Drexel. Day 12. Undiagnosed heart condition. Yuki, a 45-year-old restaurant owner from Chinatown. Day 45. Leukemia. The others were in various stages, various states of acceptance. We sat in a circle, like some kind of twisted AA meeting, and we talked about the sound. It's not just a bell, Margaret said, her hands folded primly in her lap. Sometimes I hear voices in it. My mother, my daughter, people calling me home. I hear music, Jackson added, nervously tapping his foot. Like every song I've ever loved, all at once. It's beautiful and terrible. I hear silence, Yuki whispered. Perfect, complete silence inside the ringing, like the world finally stopping its noise. I listened to their stories, their theories, their fears, and I realized something. We weren't just dying. We were being chosen, selected. The bell didn't ring for everyone who was about to die. Philadelphia had hundreds of deaths every month, but only a few heard the call. What makes us special? I asked Samuel after the meeting. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, I've been thinking about that for weeks now. Best I can figure, we're the ones who need to hear it, the ones who wouldn't let go otherwise. The bell gives us time to prepare, time to say goodbye, time to make peace. But I wasn't interested in making peace. I was interested in answers. I dove deeper into the research, found accounts going back to the Revolution. Washington himself had written about soldiers who claimed to hear phantom bells before battle. Benjamin Franklin had a letter discussing the peculiar acoustic properties of bells and their effect on the human soul during moments of transition. Then I found something that changed everything. It was in a private collection, a journal that had been digitized but never publicized. Written by John Pass, one of the 2 men who recast the Liberty Bell after it first cracked. His entry for April 15th, 1753. The bell is complete, but I fear what we have wrought. Stowe says I worry too much, but I hear it at night when no one rings it. A sound like the earth itself groaning. We used the old bell's metal in the recasting, as requested, but there was something else in that bronze, something that should have stayed buried. The inscription speaks of proclaiming liberty, but I fear we have proclaimed something else entirely. May God forgive us for what we've unleashed. I showed the entry to Samuel at our next meeting. Day 35 for me, day 47 for him. His hands shook as he read it. "My God," he whispered. "It's not calling us home, it's collecting us. Day 48. Tomorrow was supposed to be my last day, and I wasn't ready, not even close." Sarah had left 3 days ago, taking Emma to her mother's house in Jersey. She'd cried, begged me to get help, threatened divorce. But how could I explain that I was trying to save not just myself, but everyone who would come after? The bell had been collecting souls for over 200 years. Someone had to stop it. I stood in Independence Hall at midnight, having snuck in through a maintenance entrance Samuel had told me about before day 49 took him. He'd gone peacefully, they said, smiled at the end, like he was greeting an old friend. But I wasn't going peacefully. The Liberty Bell sat in its climate-controlled case, lit by subtle spotlights that made the crack look like a mouth, ready to speak, or scream. I had 40 minutes until the midnight toll, 40 minutes to do what no one had done in 2 centuries. Silence the bell for good. The hammer felt heavy in my hands, not a sledgehammer. That would have been too obvious, too difficult to sneak in. Just a geology hammer from my old rock collecting days, small but dense. It would have to be enough. At 11:55, I heard footsteps. "I knew you'd come here." I turned to find Margaret, the nurse from our group. But she looked different. Younger, healthier. The gray had left her hair, and her eyes were bright, too bright. "You're on day 49, I said. It wasn't a question. 49 and a half, actually. "I've been waiting for you, Marcus. We all have." "We?" And then I saw them, dozens of figures materializing from the shadows. Jackson, Yuki. Others I recognized from our meetings, others I didn't. All looking perfectly healthy. All smiling that same terrible, peaceful smile. "You don't understand," Margaret said, stepping closer. "The bell isn't killing us. It's saving us, preserving us. We become part of its song, part of history itself. That's not salvation," I said, gripping the hammer tighter. "That's imprisonment." "Is it?" Samuel doesn't think so. None of them do. Every soul that's joined the bell over the centuries, they're all still here, still conscious, still free, just free in a different way. The midnight toll began. Not from the bell, from them, from the assembled dead. Their mouths opened in unison, and the sound that emerged was the same bone-deep resonance I'd been hearing for 48 days. "Dong!" I staggered, but kept my footing. Raised the hammer. "You can't destroy it," Margaret said, her voice now harmonizing with the bell's tone. "It's not just bronze in history anymore. It's us. All of us. Break the bell, and you break thousands of souls. Dong!" "Maybe they need to be free," I gasped, blood running from my nose. "Free to go where? This is our freedom. Our choice. Join us, Marcus. Your family will understand in time. Everyone does." Ding. I thought of Sarah, of Emma, of growing old with them, watching Emma graduate, get married, have kids of her own. Normal life, normal death, no bells, no ghosts, no eternal preservation in bronze and sound. Dong Yi. But I also thought of Patriot Ghost 1776. Of all the people who'd heard the bell over the centuries, who'd had 49 days to make peace but had instead been collected like specimens. Was that really freedom? Or just another kind of tyranny? Dong Gi. "I'm sorry," I whispered, and brought the hammer down. The impact sent shockwaves up my arm. The bell didn't break, but it rang. Really rang. Not the ghostly toll I'd been hearing, but a true physical sound that shattered every piece of glass in the pavilion. Alarms screamed. Emergency lights flooded the space. The ghosts flickered, their mouths open in silent screams or songs. I couldn't tell which. Dong hug! One more toll. My 49th day toll, the final call. Margaret reached out to me, her form already fading. You don't know what you've done. No, I admitted, dropping the hammer as security guards stormed in. But at least I did something. The last thing I remember before the darkness took me was the sound of the Liberty Bell. Not ringing, but laughing. Or maybe crying. Sometimes, even now, I'm not sure there's a difference. I woke up in Pennsylvania Hospital 3 days later. 3 days past my 49th. The doctors couldn't explain it. Said I'd had some kind of seizure in Independence Hall, been found with a hammer, ranting about ghosts. They wanted to keep me for psychiatric evaluation, but physically I was fine. Better than fine. The small heart murmur I'd had since childhood? Gone. The chronic back pain from a car accident in college? Vanished. Sarah came back. We told Emma that Daddy had been sick but was better now. We moved to the suburbs, away from the city, away from the bell. I got a new job teaching at a small private school in Chester County. Life went on. But here's the thing. Here's the reason I'm telling you this story now, 2 years later. Last week, my daughter Emma came to me. She's 10 now, all gangly limbs and questions about everything. She pulled on my sleeve after dinner and whispered, "Daddy, why do I hear bells?" I froze. Felt my heart skip a beat, then two. What kind of bells, sweetheart? Big ones. Deep ones. They make my teeth hurt. She looked up at me with those innocent eyes. They started 3 days ago, 7 times a day. Just like you used to hear, right? Before you got sick? I hadn't told her. Sarah hadn't told her. No one had told her about the 7 tolls. "Daddy," Emma continued, her voice smaller now, scared. "Am I going to die?" I pulled her close, held her tight, and lied. "No, baby. You're going to be fine." But that night, after she'd gone to bed, I did the math. 49 days from now would be December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. The next morning, I drove back to Philadelphia, back to the basement of that old church in Society Hill. The building had been sold, converted to condos, but I knew there were others. There had to be. I found them in a 24-hour diner on Spring Garden Street. 3 new faces, hollow-eyed and desperate. They recognized me the moment I walked in. "You're him," said a middle-aged woman with paint-stained fingers, "the one who broke the pattern, who lived past 49. How did you—" "Word travels, even among the dying." She gestured to the empty booth across from her. "I'm Diana. Day 16. And you're going to tell us how you survived." I sat down, ordered coffee I didn't want, and told them everything. About the hammer, about the choice I'd made, about Emma. "So, it didn't end," said the youngest of the 3, a boy who couldn't have been more than 20. "Breaking the bell just changed things. Changed how? I'm Tony." Day 23. And I've been having dreams about your daughter, about others like her. The bell isn't just calling the dying anymore, Mr. Chen. It's calling their children, their bloodlines, anyone connected to someone who defied it. My blood turned to ice water. How many? In Philadelphia alone? At least a dozen kids we know of. Maybe more. Diana pulled out a smartphone, showed me a group chat. Messages from parents all describing the same thing. Children hearing bells. 7 times a day. Starting 3 days ago, the same day Emma first heard them. "It's expanding its collection," Tony continued. "Adapting." You broke the old pattern, so it's creating a new one. Instead of taking individuals every 49 days, it's going for entire bloodlines. Generational harvest. I thought I'd saved everyone by striking the bell. Instead, I'd doomed a generation of children. There has to be a way to stop this, I said. Maybe. Diana slid a folder across the table. I'm an art restoration expert, was anyway. Before the bells started, I've been researching the original casting process, trying to understand what John Pass meant about something that should have stayed buried. I opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of documents I'd never seen, shipping manifests from 1752, letters between London foundries and Philadelphia merchants. The original bell wasn't just cast from ordinary bronze, Diana explained. According to these records, it contained metal from a much older source. A church bell that had been destroyed in London during the Great Fire of 1666. That bell dated back to the medieval period, possibly even earlier. What's significant about that? Medieval church bells weren't just instruments. They were believed to have protective properties. Warding bells, used to drive away evil spirits, plague, death itself. But some historians think certain bells were cursed, used in dark rituals, infused with other purposes. Tony leaned forward. So when they melted down that old London bell and mixed it with new bronze to create our Liberty Bell, they may have transferred more than just metal, Diana finished. The original bell's purpose, its hunger, its power over death itself. I stared at the documents, my mind racing. If that's true, then breaking the physical bell wouldn't stop it. The essence, the curse, or whatever it is would still be there, still active. Exactly. And now it's adapting, evolving, finding new ways to fulfill its original purpose. Which was what? Diana's expression grew grim. According to these medieval records, the old bell was used in something called the Harvest of Saints, a ritual where priests would ring it to call souls to judgment, not just the dying, but anyone they deemed worthy of collection. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. The Liberty Bell wasn't malfunctioning or cursed by accident. It was working exactly as designed. The inscription about proclaiming liberty hadn't been ironic or corrupted. It had been literal. The bell was proclaiming liberty from life itself, offering freedom from mortal existence to those it chose. And now it had chosen our children. How do we stop it? I asked. We don't know, Tony admitted. But we think the answer might be in Philadelphia's underground. The city has extensive tunnel systems, some dating back to colonial times. According to these documents, the original bell casting was done in a foundry that was later built over. The foundation might still be there, along with other things. What kind of other things? The kind that might explain why the bell has been so active in Philadelphia specifically. Why it draws people here to die. Why it's centered on Independence Hall. Diana gathered the papers back into the folder. We think there's more than just the bell involved. There might be an entire network of, let's call them spiritual infrastructure, built into the city's foundation. My daughter had 43 days left. I had 43 days to uncover centuries of hidden history, find whatever was buried beneath Philadelphia, and somehow break a curse that predated the United States itself. The bell tolled midnight somewhere in the distance, not audible to normal ears, but I could feel it. A vibration that started in my bones and worked its way out. Emma was hearing that same toll right now, 2 hours away in our suburban home. Counting down to Christmas, counting down to her final day, unless I could find a way to save her. The search was about to begin. I sat at my computer and started typing, started researching. Because I'd broken something when I hit that bell. Changed something. The ghosts were gone. I hadn't seen any since that night. But the bell itself, the bell was still there, still calling, and now it was calling my daughter. They say the Liberty Bell hasn't rung since 1846. They say the crack silenced it forever. They say a lot of things, but I know the truth. The bell rings. It rings for the dying, for the chosen, for the collected. And sometimes it rings for the children of those who defied it. I have 46 days to find a real answer. 46 days to save my daughter. And if you're reading this, if you found this story because you too have started hearing the bells, then you have 49 days to decide. Will you join them or will you fight? The Liberty Bell is waiting for your answer. And trust me, it has all the time in the world. But you might not. So tell me, do you hear it too? That deep, resonant toll that makes reality shiver? Because if you do, if you've read this far and you can hear it now, faint but insistent, then welcome to the Brotherhood of the Bell. Your 49 days start now. Listen, can you hear it? Dong! Story number 2. The dashboard clock read 2:47 a.m. when I saw her, standing there on the shoulder of Route 491. My sister Rachel, the same sister who'd been missing for 3 years, the same sister whose memorial service I'd attended 18 months ago when the police finally declared her dead. But there she was, thumb out, wearing the exact same Denver Broncos hoodie she'd worn the night she disappeared. I'm telling you this because I need someone to understand what happened that night. Because the police won't believe me. Because my therapist thinks it's survivor's guilt. And because, well, I keep seeing more of them now. More people I recognize. Standing along that cursed stretch of highway. But before you think I'm crazy, let me ask you something. Have you ever driven late at night and seen someone on the side of the road who looked familiar? Someone who made your stomach drop? Someone who shouldn't be there? Yeah, that feeling. Hold on to it, because after you hear what happened to me, you'll never look at hitchhikers the same way again. All right, the story's about to start now. Get comfortable, lock your doors, and whatever you do, don't answer if someone knocks. I'd been driving for 6 hours straight from Albuquerque to Denver, running on nothing but gas station coffee and those terrible roller grill hot dogs they sell at Circle K. My eyes were burning. The radio kept fading in and out between stations. Classic Colorado, where you lose signal the moment you leave civilization. Route 491 used to be Route 666. Did you know that? They changed it back in 2003 because of all the accidents, all the disappearances. Locals still call it the Devil's Highway, though. Smart locals don't drive it at night. But I'm from Phoenix originally, and I was too stubborn to stop at a motel. The headlights carved through the darkness like butter knives through black velvet. Nothing but sagebrush and shadows for miles. That's when I saw the figure. Maybe a quarter mile ahead. Just a silhouette at first. Arm extended, thumb up. My first instinct was to keep driving. Mom always said never pick up hitchhikers, especially not out here. But as I got closer, something about the way they stood, the slouch of their shoulders, the way their hair caught in my high beams. My foot hit the brake before my brain caught up. Rachel. The word came out as a whisper. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. It couldn't be her. Rachel was gone. The search teams had covered hundreds of miles. The FBI had been involved. They'd found her car at the bottom of a ravine near Durango. No body, but enough blood that... But there she was. Same messy brown hair. Same oversized hoodie. Same beat-up Converse sneakers with the smiley face she'd drawn on the left toe in Sharpie. I pulled over about 50 feet past her. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. In the rearview mirror, she started walking toward my car. Not running, not hurrying, just walking, like she had all the time in the world. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to drive away. This wasn't possible. This was grief playing tricks. This was exhaustion. This was anything but real. She knocked on the passenger window. 3 soft taps. I looked over, and it was her face. Her exact face. Down to the little scar above her left eyebrow from when she fell off her bike at age 7, down to the constellation of freckles across her nose, down to that crooked smile that always meant she was up to something. "Hey, Jake," she said through the glass. Her breath didn't fog the window. "You gonna let me in, or what?" My hand moved to the door lock, hesitated. "Rachel, is it really you?" She tilted her head, that familiar gesture. Who else would it be? I unlocked the door. She slid into the passenger seat with that same casual grace she'd always had. The car didn't shift with her weight. The dome light came on, illuminating her face, and for a second, just a second, I could have sworn I saw through her, like looking at a projection. But then I blinked, and she was solid again. "Thanks," she said, buckling her seatbelt. The click sounded wrong, hollow. "I've been waiting for you." "Waiting? Rachel, you've been missing for 3 years. Mom and Dad. We had a memorial. The police said—" "I know what they said." Her voice was exactly as I remembered, that slight rasp from years of singing in terrible punk bands. "But I'm here now, aren't I?" I put the car in drive. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Where have you been?" She stared straight ahead at the dark highway. "Around." "Around?" "Rachel, we searched everywhere. I drove this route 100 times looking for you. Where were you?" She turned to look at me then, and her eyes, God, her eyes were wrong. They were the right color, that green-gold hazel, but they were flat, like looking at a photograph of eyes rather than eyes themselves. "I was waiting," she said again. "Waiting for the right time, waiting for you." The heater was on full blast, but the car was getting colder. I could see my breath now. "We need to call Mom and Dad. They need to know you're—" "No." The word came out sharp, final. "Not yet. Just drive, please, Jake. Just drive for a while." We drove in silence for maybe 10 minutes. 10 minutes where nothing felt real. The highway stretched endlessly ahead. No other cars. No lights except the stars and my headlights. Rachel sat perfectly still beside me, not fidgeting like she used to, not messing with the radio, not doing any of the things that made her, her. "Remember when we were kids?" she finally said. "That summer at Grandpa's cabin in Estes Park?" "Yeah," I managed. "You caught that huge trout and made us all eat it for dinner." She smiled, but it didn't reach those flat eyes. "You hated fish. Still do. But you ate it anyway. Every bite. Because I was so proud." The memory felt warm against the growing cold in the car. "You were so happy. First fish you ever caught." "I wasn't the first," she said quietly. "What?" "I wasn't the first to catch something that day." "But you don't remember that, do you?" I frowned, trying to recall. That summer was 20 years ago. We'd been kids. Rachel would have been 12, me 14. "Tommy Hutchins was there," she continued. "The neighbor kid. He caught something first. Something that wasn't a fish. Tommy Hutchins. I hadn't thought about him in years. Weird kid who lived down the road from Grandpa's cabin, always telling stories about seeing things in the woods. His parents said he had an overactive imagination. Then one day he just wasn't around anymore. Moved away, Grandpa had said. "Tommy didn't move away," Rachel said, like she was reading my thoughts. "Tommy got taken." "Taken? What are you talking about?" She turned to face me fully now, in the dim dashboard light. Her skin looked gray. "There are things out here, Jake. Old things. Hungry things. They take people sometimes, but sometimes they send them back. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Rachel, you're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. Do you know why they changed the number of this highway? Superstition. Too many accidents. She laughed, but it sounded like it was coming from the back seat even though she was right beside me. It wasn't superstition. It was a warning. Route 666 was marked for a reason. A boundary. A place where the walls are thin. Walls? Between here and there. Between what is and what shouldn't be. The number change didn't fix anything. It just made people forget to be careful. The temperature dropped another few degrees. Ice was forming on the inside of the windshield. Rachel, what happened to you? Really happened? She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, I picked up a hitchhiker. My blood went cold. What? 3 years ago. On this same stretch of road, late at night, just like now, I saw someone I recognized, someone who shouldn't have been there, someone who'd been gone a long time. Who? Tommy Hutchins. I nearly swerved off the road. That's impossible. Tommy disappeared when we were kids. Exactly. But there he was, looking exactly the same as he did that summer, 12 years old, standing on the side of Route 491 with his thumb out. And I stopped, Jake, just like you stopped, because I had to know. I had to understand. The ice on the windshield was spreading. I turned the defroster up higher, but it didn't help. He got in my car, she continued, sat right where I'm sitting now. And he told me things. Told me about the space between. The place where lost things go. The place where they wait. Wait for what? She looked at me with those flat photograph eyes. For someone they loved to come find them. To complete the circle. To take their place. My heart stopped. Rachel, are you pulled over, she said softly. You let me in. The circle is almost complete. I should have kept driving then, should have ignored her completely and focused on the road ahead. But something in her voice, something desperate and real beneath the wrongness, made me listen. There are rules, Jake, she whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear. Ancient rules. Older than the highway. Older than the towns. The indigenous people who lived here, they knew. They marked this place, warned about it. But settlers came anyway, built roads anyway, and the road, it adapted. Adapted how? It learned to use our connections against us. Our love, our guilt, our need to save each other. She paused, staring at something I couldn't see in the darkness beyond the headlights. Every culture that's lived here has stories about this place. The Ute called it the walking path of shadows. The Spanish explorers wrote about El Camino de los Perdidos, the road of the lost. Even the railroad workers in the 1800s. They'd find empty train cars, no signs of struggle, just gone. The clock read 3:15 a.m., but something felt wrong about the time. Like we'd been driving longer than that, or maybe no time at all. How many people, I asked. How many are out there? Rachel turned to look out the back window. In the reflection, I saw dozens of figures walking behind us now, following the car at impossible distances. Some looked fresh, recent. Others were clearly from different eras. A woman in a Victorian dress, a man in a military uniform from some war I couldn't identify, children in clothing from decades past. Hundreds, she said, maybe thousands. Time moves differently here, Jake. People have been disappearing on this stretch of road for over a century. Some get taken immediately, others get to choose. Choose what? How they want to be lost. Some fight it. They become the angry ones, the dangerous ones, They try to force others to take their place, but some. She looked at me with something almost like affection in those flat eyes. Some try to protect the people they love, even if it means staying lost forever. The heater was running, but frost was forming on my coffee cup in the holder. My breath came out in visible puffs. The temperature, I started. It's not really temperature, Rachel interrupted. It's the space between touching our world, like two different climates trying to occupy the same place. The closer dawn gets, the thinner the barrier becomes. That's when choices have to be made. I looked at the dashboard again. 3:22 a.m. Still hours until sunrise, but somehow I could feel something approaching. A deadline, a moment of no return. Rachel, I said carefully, when you picked up Tommy, did you know? Did you understand what you were choosing? She was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was younger, more like the sister I remembered. I thought I was being kind. I thought I was helping someone who'd been lost for so long. But kindness can be its own trap out here. The road feeds on good intentions, just as much as bad ones. The followers behind us were getting closer. I could see them more clearly now in the side mirrors. Men, women, children, all walking at the same steady pace, all keeping perfect distance from the car, all watching. They're not malicious, Rachel said, noticing my attention. They're just waiting, hoping, like I was hoping until you stopped, like Tommy was hoping until I stopped. It's a chain, Jake. A long, unbroken chain stretching back decades. And once you're part of it, you can't break free. Not alone, she said. But there are ways. Loopholes, the road has rules, but rules can be bent if you understand them well enough. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a stop in the middle of the empty highway. My chest was heaving. Panic clawed at my throat. Get out. Rachel didn't move. I can't. Get out of my car. I can't, Jake. Not until it's finished. That's how it works. Once you stop, once you let them in, you have to see it through. See what through? She pointed ahead. There, standing in the middle of the road, was another figure. Small, child-sized. Tommy's still here, she said. He never left. None of us ever really leave. We just wait. Wait for someone who remembers us. Someone who cares enough to stop. The child in the road started walking toward us. In the headlights, I could see his face. It was Tommy, exactly as he'd been 20 years ago, wearing the same Pokemon t-shirt he'd worn that last summer, the same gap-toothed grin. Don't look at him, Rachel whispered urgently. Don't look directly at him. But I couldn't look away. Tommy was getting closer, 10 feet, 5 feet. He walked right up to my driver's side window, pressed his small hand against the glass. His palm left no print. Hey, Jake. His voice was exactly as I remembered, high, cheerful. Wrong. Long time no see. This isn't real. This can't be real. Real is relative out here, Tommy said. Rachel learned that. Now you're learning too. I turned to Rachel. What does he want? The same thing I want, the same thing we all want, to go home. Then go. I'm not stopping you, Tommy laughed. That child's laugh that should have been innocent but wasn't. We can't go home, Jake. Not really. We're stuck. Stuck between. Unless what? Rachel's hand touched mine on the gear shift. Her skin was ice. Unless someone takes our place. Someone connected to us. Someone who cares. The road needs its toll. Jake, it's always needed its toll. I jerked my hand away. You're saying you want me to... I don't want anything, Rachel said, and for the first time, she sounded like my sister again, sad, scared, lost. But the road, the space between, it has rules. Old rules. I broke them when I stopped for Tommy. Now, it's your turn. Tommy finished. The cycle continues. Always has, always will. Route 666, Route 491. Doesn't matter what you call it. The road remembers, the road takes, and the road gives back, changed. More figures were appearing in the darkness beyond the headlights. Dozens of them. All standing, all waiting. Some looked fresh, recent. Others looked like they'd been standing there for decades. Men in military uniforms from wars I couldn't name. Women in dresses from the 50s. Children in clothes I'd only seen in old photographs. All of them, Rachel whispered. All of them stopped for someone they knew. And now they wait. Wait for their someone. Their anchor, their replacement. This is insane. Is it? How many missing person cases along this highway, Jake? How many people who just vanished? Cars found empty, no trace, no explanation. I knew the statistics. Everyone who lived in Colorado did. Route 491 had one of the highest disappearance rates of any highway in America. The FBI had a task force. Theories ranged from serial killers to drug cartels to alien abductions. But this, I can't stay here. I said. I won't. Tommy tilted his head. You don't have to stay. You can leave. Drive away right now. But what? Rachel squeezed my hand again, tighter this time. But we go with you. We can't leave the car now. Jake, not until sunrise. That's the rule. You let us in. Now we're yours until dawn. I looked at the clock. 3:31 a.m. Sunrise was at least 3 hours away. And then, Tommy said, you get to choose. Take our place here or carry us with you forever. We'll always be there. Jake, in every reflection, every shadow, every time you're alone in the dark. We'll be there, getting stronger, getting more real, until one day, you'll be the one standing on the side of the road, waiting, hoping someone you love will stop. I drove. What else could I do? Rachel sat beside me, silent now. Tommy had somehow moved to the back seat without opening a door. In the rearview mirror, I could see him swinging his legs, humming some tune I couldn't quite place. The miles disappeared under the wheels. The road seemed to stretch forever. No matter how far I drove, we never seemed to get anywhere. The same desert, the same darkness, the same nothing. Tell me about the place, I finally said. The space between. What's it like? Rachel stared out the window at nothing. Cold, empty, but also crowded, full of everyone who ever got lost, everyone who took a wrong turn, everyone who stopped when they shouldn't have. Are you suffering? She considered this. Not exactly. It's more like existing without being, watching without seeing, being aware but not alive, like being a memory of yourself. And you've been there for 3 years? Time doesn't work the same. It's been forever. It's been 5 minutes. It's been no time at all. Tommy leaned forward between the seats. The worst part is the wanting. Wanting to be real again. Wanting to be warm. Wanting to belong somewhere instead of just drifting. But if I take your place, then I'll be drifting. Yeah, Rachel said quietly. You will. We drove in silence again. The clock moved, but time felt frozen. 3:47 a.m., 4:15 a.m., 4:32 a.m. The gas gauge hadn't moved despite the miles. Nothing made sense anymore. There is... Tommy started, then stopped. What? Nothing. Forget it. No, tell me. Rachel shot him a warning look, but he continued anyway. There is another way, but it's worse. Worse than being trapped between dimensions? Maybe. You could spread it? Spread it. Rachel closed her eyes. Don't, Tommy. He deserves to know all his options. What does he mean, spread it? Rachel sighed. You could stop. Pick up others. Others you recognize. Create more connections, more anchors. The more you spread it, the thinner your own connection becomes. Eventually, you might be able to slip free, but then those people would be trapped. Yes, and they'd do the same. Pick up others. Spread it further. That's how it grows, Jake. That's how the road feeds. One person stops for curiosity, then another for love, then another for guilt, on, forever. I thought about everyone I knew, family, friends, co-workers, the idea of condemning them to this. I won't do that. Then you have two choices, Tommy said. Stay with us at sunrise, or carry us with you forever. 5:18 a.m. The sky was starting to lighten in the east, just barely, a hint of purple against the black. What happens if I stay? Rachel finally looked at me, really looked at me. And for just a moment, her eyes were alive again, were her again. You become like us, waiting, hoping, and I get to leave, to rest, to finally stop existing in between. And if I don't, then I stay in between. But part of me stays with you too. A shadow, a weight, growing heavier every day, until you can't bear it anymore, until you come back to the road. They always come back to the road, Jake. Everyone who's ever driven away, they all come back eventually. 5:45 a.m. The purple was spreading, orange creeping in at the edges. Why did you stop for Tommy? I asked. Really? She smiled sadly. Because I remembered him. Because I felt guilty that we never looked for him, that we just accepted he'd moved away, because I thought maybe I could help, could fix something that had been broken for so long. And now I'm here for the same reason. Yeah, that's how it works. Love, guilt, regret, recognition. The road uses them all. 6:02 a.m., almost sunrise. Jake, Rachel said softly, whatever you choose. I want you to know it's okay. I understand. I'd understand either choice. Tommy had gone quiet in the back seat. The figures on the side of the road were becoming clearer as the light grew. So many of them, all waiting, all hoping. There's something else, Rachel said suddenly. Something I didn't tell you. About that summer? About the fish? What about it? After dinner, after you forced down every bite, you got sick, remember? Threw up all night. Mom was so worried. But you never told me. Never complained. Never made me feel bad about it. I remembered. The worst food poisoning of my life. But seeing how proud she'd been. That's who you are, Jake. Someone who takes the pain to spare others. Someone who... She stopped mid-sentence. The first ray of sunlight broke the horizon. Rachel's hand became solid, warm, real. Tommy made a sound in the back seat, something between a gasp and a sob. The road behind us was full of people now, hundreds, all watching, all waiting to see what I would choose. I pulled over to the shoulder, put the car in park, looked at my sister, my real sister, for what might be the last time. Get out, I said. Jake, get out. Rachel, both of you, get out and walk away. Don't look back. You don't understand. If you don't choose, if you just let us go, the road will... I know what it will do. It will keep me. Not in between, not waiting, but driving. Forever driving this stretch. Never able to leave. Never able to stop. I figured it out. Rachel, the third option. The one no one takes because it's the loneliest. But it means you're free. Both of you. Rachel's eyes, her real eyes, filled with tears. Jake, no. Get out. Rachel, please, let me do this one thing right. She kissed my forehead, opened the door. The morning air rushed in, warm and desert sweet. Tommy followed her out. They stood on the shoulder, solid and real in the dawn light. Thank you, Rachel whispered. Go. Before it changes its mind. They walked away, down the embankment, into the desert. With each step they became more solid, more real, more alive. I watched until they disappeared behind a rise. Then I put the car in drive. I've been driving Route 491 ever since. Day blends into night blends into day. I stop for gas, but I'm never able to leave the highway, never able to turn off. The exit ramps don't work for me anymore. The side roads lead back to the main stretch. But here's the thing, and this is why I'm telling you this story. Why I need you to understand, to share this, to remember it. I see people sometimes, people who look lost, people who look tired, people driving alone at night with that 1,000-yard stare that says they're running from something or to something. And sometimes, just sometimes, I can reach them, not directly. I can't stop, can't speak to them, but I can leave signs, messages, warnings, like this story you're hearing now. Somehow, some way, my words find their way out, through dreams, through late-night radio static, through stories whispered in truck stops and diners. Don't pick up hitchhikers on Route 491, especially not the ones you recognize, because the road remembers, the road takes, and the road never, ever lets go. But wait, there's one more thing. Something I haven't told you. Something that changes everything. Last week, or maybe last year, time is strange here. I saw someone new on the side of the road, someone I recognized but shouldn't be there, someone impossible. It was me, standing there with my thumb out, wearing the same clothes I'm wearing now, the same tired expression, the same everything. And I realized the road doesn't just take, it duplicates. It creates echoes, copies, versions of us that splinter off every time we make a choice. Every time we could have stopped but didn't. Every time we did stop but shouldn't have. So, let me ask you something, and think carefully before you answer. Have you ever driven past someone who looked familiar? Someone who looked like someone you knew was safe at home? Someone who couldn't possibly be there? What if it was them? Another version? A lost version? A version that made a different choice? And what if the version of you listening to this story right now isn't the only version? What if somewhere out there, on some dark highway, another you is standing with their thumb out, waiting, hoping someone will stop? Would you pull over for yourself? Would you let yourself in? The sun is setting now. It's always setting or rising here. Never fully day, never fully night. And I can see them gathering again, all the lost ones, all the waiting ones, all the different versions of everyone who ever traveled this road. They're asking me to tell you one last thing. Check your rearview mirror. Check it right now. That shadow in the back seat, the one that looks almost like someone you know. When did that get there? And more importantly, is it too late to make them leave? Sweet dreams, and drive safely. Whatever you do, keep driving. Don't stop. Not for anything. Not for anyone. Not even for me. Especially not for me.